Lead Me Winter Training School Madrid 2021. Media Accessibility Training, Sign Language and Subtitling for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Organised by the Tradaval Research Group and AVLA project at Complutense University Madrid.
I'll be talking, as Juanpe was saying, about involving users in media accessibility research. I will be dealing with some ethical aspects, and also I will put the focus on knowledge transfer in this short lecture. If you want to interrupt me at any point, that's not a problem at all. Just unmute yourself and ask me questions. And if you want to write them down on the chat, then I kindly ask Juanpe to please let me know. While you are not talking, please, can you make sure that your mic is muted? Because I hear some weird noises, and yeah, I think it's getting better. Thank you very much. I still hear it, but I can do it. Okay. For those of you who were in the summer school, this is not a requirement, of course, but just a reminder for those who were not there, maybe, very often research on audiovisual translation and media accessibility focuses on one of these aspects. And this is very much based on the book by Sharon O'Brien and Gabriela Saldaña, Translation Studies Methodologies. So sometimes we focus on the product. So we describe an audio description, we describe how subtitling is shown, for instance, for a specific program. Sometimes we focus on the process of creation, for instance, on the process of post-editing, etc. Sometimes we are more interested on the participants, on the end users, the ones that are using the audiovisual transfer modes or the accessibility services. And sometimes we are more interested, or we put the focus on the context, on the society, on ideology, on other aspects. And sometimes we mixed all those things, right? But very often, especially in the last years, in audiovisual translation and media accessibility, users have been at the center of research. Users who create content, so users that we analyze so that to better understand the processes of creation, for instance, or delivery, but also users who receive this audiovisual content, these access services, the end users. Another basic idea that I'm sure that you are all familiar with is this slogan, nothing about us without us. Persons with disabilities, when we research about access services, they want to be involved. Of course, it's obvious. I mean, you don't want someone else to be researching that has something that has a direct impact on you. So this is something that us as researchers need to keep in mind. Let's keep in mind that we want to work with the users who will be using the access services. Please, there's some music going on. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you very much. I'm not advocating for a medical approach, okay? I'm more in favor.
Please, if you are not going to ask or you are not going to participate, please unmute, mute your mics.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think it is already muted. Sorry, Anna. You are muted now.
But I didn't, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's keep in mind this slogan and involve as many users as possible in our researches. Not taking a medical approach, but a more open approach, a more capability-based approach. Sorry. When we involve users as participants, we gather data from these users very often. And this data can be qualitative, quantitative, and we can use a wide variety of methods to gather this data. I'm not going to get into that. This is something we discussed in the last summer school, and I'm sure those of you who were not there are familiar with this. But we can gather data through eye tracking, electrodermal activity, heart rate, keystroke logging, but also with through focus groups, through interviews, through questionnaires. If any of you is interested in any of these topics that I'm not going to get into detail, so all these research methods, etc., I think that the book by Gabriela Saldana and Sharon O'Brien, Research Methodologies in Translation Studies, is a good book on methodology. It's an excellent book, actually. I also would recommend, from a broader perspective, Scientific Methods for Humanities. And if you are interested in more innovative approaches, maybe more creative, this is a book I recently read, Creative Research Methods in the Social Sciences, which provides quite interesting food for thought. From a more global perspective, I always recommend Social Research Methods by Alan Bryman. For me, it's a fantastic book. I learned a lot from this book. And then if you are more interested in user experience, user testing, I'm familiar with these two. I'm sure there are more books, but these two, Observing the User Experience and Measuring the User Experience, are good volumes. Anyway, let's get to the main topic of my talk after this brief introduction, which is users and media accessibility research. I think that the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, who are the users? Who are the users that we want to do research with? How do we categorize them? And then how do we deal ethically with them? So I like to present examples from ongoing projects, in this case, European projects, because it gives us a perspective of how these topics can be approached. So maybe some of these topics are far from your research interest right now, but I'm sure you will get some ideas out of this. So the first one is Traction. Traction is a European project in which we are co-creating an opera in 3 different places. So in Raval, in a neighborhood in Barcelona, Liceu Opera House is co-creating an opera with people from the neighborhood. In Leiria, in Portugal, there is a co-creation process ongoing at Leiria's prison with young inmates. And then, and that is led by SAMP Musical School. And the third place where this co-creation is taking place is in Ireland. The Irish National Opera is co-creating an opera with diverse communities from the Aran Islands and from rural areas in Ireland. So imagine you start a project, a big 3-year project with many partners, a European project, and we want to research co-creation processes in 3 very different locations. And we want to do user tests to assess the co-creation, how the co-creation is going and how the performance are, and also the social impact. So one of the first things we had to do in this project was define who the users are. And in this case, after much discussion, we came up with a categorization and with definitions. So in that particular project, for instance, we decided that there would be professionals and non-professionals, and then that we would have artists and we would have users. Artists co-creating, users using the technology. I'm not going to get into the details because I'm not interested in the definitions right now. What I'm interested in is in the concept. So the first step was to define the users. You can only involve users once you know the users you want to involve. And the second thing we did was categorize the users, okay? So in Traction participants, we'll have professionals who can be from the artistic team, the technical and production team, from Traction, and we will have non-professionals, again, with different categories, working together on a co-creation process. Additionally, we'll have audiences, and we'll also have other people involved. Why do we need this? we need these definitions and we need these categorizations, because when we start doing user tests, when we involve users in the testing, we need to know which users we want to involve for each specific test. And even if it seems very simple, I think that's the aim, to make things easy and to make categorizations and definitions that work across different trials. In these cases, I was talking about Ireland, Barcelona, and Portugal. So this is one example of how we categorize users in the Traction project. A similar thing happened in Mediaverse, totally different project, totally different approach. In this project, which is an ongoing project, what we are doing is developing like a platform, like an ecosystem. But imagine like a platform where you log in and then you can access different tools, I'm putting it very simply, and you can create content and you can share it with other people and you can even monetize it, okay? So you say, okay, I give this for free, or maybe no, I want to get some money out of it, or you decide, you know, who owns the copyright, etc. It's like, imagine a social media, but not owned by a company, but using what's called blockchain technology. So we own it. I mean, it's like an ecosystem, a distributed one. Okay, the idea was that here again, we are developing something, in this case, a platform, and we want to use that in 3 very different cases. So there will be one trial in which people will be using this Mediaverse platform to be what's called citizen journalists. Imagine you are at a demonstration, okay, and you take pictures, and then you upload them on this platform instead of the usual social media, and there you decide if, you know, if a media company wants to use that, what's the acknowledgement that they have to give you, how they can use it, do they have to pay you? You can decide all these things, okay? So we want to use that platform for citizen journalism. We want to use that platform also for co-creating content with vulnerable people as a tool for social inclusion. Let me put one example. We are working with migrant people who create this content to tell their stories, their narratives, and they co-create it in 360 videos, etc. And they will be uploading this content on the platform. And finally, in the Mediaverse project, we'll be doing artistic experiments. If you are not lost at this point, because I know that I'm explaining this very, very quickly, the main idea is we'll have a platform that we will be using for very diverse purposes, and we'll need to test if it works, okay? So what's the first step when you want to involve users? Defining who the users are. And with such diverse profiles and case studies that we will be doing, in this case, what we decided to do is identify the main roles that a user can have in the platform. So a user can be an administrator, a user can manage content, a user can simply produce content, the videos, or a user can consume the videos. And maybe some of them have different roles at the same time. So I just put 2 examples from 2 ongoing European projects to see how we approach the categorization of users. And this is always a first step in any research project with users. So maybe you can adapt this to your context. When working with users, it is absolutely fundamental, actually it's a requirement, to take into account ethical aspects. So I will be referring now to the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, to the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity. I will make some specific comments about social sciences and humanities research. I will also briefly comment on the concept of vulnerable groups, and then I'll give you some advice to take into account before, during, and after the research has been conducted. As far as the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which you can read afterwards, you've got the link there, I selected 3 excerpts. The first thing is that everyone has the right to the protection of personal data concerning him or her. So this is a right that we all have in the European Union. And such data, and I read literally, must be processed fairly for specified purposes and on the basis of the consent of the person concerned or some other legitimate basis laid down by law. Everyone has the right of access to data which has been collected concerning him or her and the right to have it rectified. Many of these things will come up later, you'll see, when I present you a sample of a consent form. And the third quote I selected is specifically on persons with disabilities, and it says that the Union recognizes and respects the right of persons with disabilities to benefit from measures designed to ensure their independence, social and occupational integration and participation in the life of the community. If we move to the European Code of Conduct for Research and Integrity, and I strongly recommend that you read that document. It's a fantastic document, and as researchers, we should be familiar with it. And it says that when we develop a research, there are some principles that we need to take into account. Reliability in ensuring the quality of the research. So you need good design, methodology, analysis, and use of resources. You need to be honest. You need to be honest when you develop, you undertake, you review, or you report, you communicate research, and you have to do it in a transparent, fair, full, and unbiased way. We need to show respect for colleagues, and I underline specifically research participants, what I'm referring to as users in this case, society, ecosystems, cultural heritage, and the environment. And there needs to be accountability for the research from idea to publication, management, training, supervision, etc., etc. So that's, I just want to highlight that research participants are mentioned, and this code specifically says that we should respect them, which is obvious. But how do we respect them? We need shared guidelines, shared understanding of what that means. Researchers, and I keep reading, handle research subjects, be they human, animal, cultural, biological, environmental, or physical, with respect and care, and in accordance with legal and ethical provisions. It is crucial, it is of crucial importance that we know the methodologies, that we are familiar to them. And this is a good way to avoid, as it states on this quote, to expose research subjects, users, society, or the environment to unnecessary harm. There was this document, this is an old document, a draft document from 10 years ago, but still it has some interesting insights, because sometimes researchers in the social sciences and humanities tended to think that, oh no, all these ethical things, it's with, you know, people trying a vaccine or doing some experimental research in medical sciences. No, it also affects us. Sometimes we may just gather data about our participants, but it's not just, it's a lot. I mean, it's data that they own, so we need to be respectful of that data. But also we may be using some devices which may cause some harm, or some, rather than harm, maybe discomfort. So we need to be aware of all these things. This is especially relevant when we work with persons from what are called vulnerable groups, and I put that into inverted commas. This is a terminology that is sometimes used, although not everybody likes this concept of vulnerable. And on this European textbook on ethics in research, again, a good read for all of you, basically it says that people need to be able to give consent, and they need to be able to give consent in a way that they understand, okay? We need to take into account also the condition, the physical or psychological condition of the subjects, to avoid this harm that I was referring to. before. I wanted to give you an example from the EASIT project. Why? Because it's a different example. Whenever we do a research project in which we involve users, always we require ethical clearance. We send documents to, in my case, UAB's ethical committee, and we get approval. Yes, is there a question? Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Aska, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
No, I just joined the meeting. Sorry, I don't have any questions.
Okay.
Sorry. I was mentioning, that whenever you do a research, you need to get ethical clearance, ethical approval from an ethical committee. In my case, I do that through UAB's ethical committee. You cannot do research with users without having this approved ethical clearance. So I'm going to present an example from the EASIT project, which was a project that finished very recently on easy to understand language. And since it was on easy to understand language, we wanted to take a different approach. But first, let me explain you. When I submit this proposal to my ethical committee, and this can change depending on the ethical committee, but I can imagine that what I have here will be requested by any ethical committee. It's the title of the project. So I need to submit the title of the project, a short description, the area, if it's psychology, if it's another area, the research area for human experimentation, who will be the responsible, there needs to be someone responsible, the research objectives and methodology, the information that will be given to participants. We need to explain if there will be compensation or not, how management will be gathered, and look, also how feedback will be given to participants. And we need to acknowledge that the data will be protected according to data regulations, in this case GDPR in European Union, and that there will be a data protection officer. So in the EASIT project, we created an information sheet and a consent form in an easy language. So this was approved by UAB's ethical committee. And whenever someone did an experiment or a user test with us within the framework of the EASIT project, they had to read the information sheet and sign the consent form. The specific thing, what's different about this form in relation to the forms that you will find out there, you know, I'm sure that if you check the ethical committee at your university, they've got templates. The problem with us was that those templates were so difficult to understand. Okay, so we wanted to make them easier, and we had some discussions with the people in charge. And the thing is that in the end, in 2018, these were approved. Okay, so maybe there have been changes. Now maybe we'll need to change something. But look, in this consent form, this information sheet and consent form, we inform people about the project. The project name is EASIT. EASIT is the short form of Easy Access for Social Inclusion Training. First idea, what's the name of the project? Anna Matamala is in charge of the project. She's from Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. We inform who's responsible for that, okay? The aim of this, and then here we kept it open because sometimes we had survey, interview, focus group, test, okay? So imagine it was an interview. The aim of this interview is to get information on your experience when making content easy to understand. And since we were addressing people who may find it challenging to understand what content is, we put content can be newspapers, books, TV news, etc. This is written in easy language. Then we explain what they will be doing. This interview, for instance, or this focus group will last 20 minutes. So we give information of the method and the length. We will ask you to give us some personal data. We will ask you questions, for instance, on how to make content easy to understand. We want to know what you think about easy to understand content. See, this is written very simple. This is specifically for an easy language project, but it gives you an idea of what you need to put there. We will record you using audio and video. Again, if you record the people, you need to let them know, and this needs to be justified, and they need to accept it at the ethical committee. You can only record them if it has been approved, if they know, if they accept it, and if it's justified because of the research you want to do. If you have any questions, please ask them now, okay? Or send an email. But in any case, you need to give them the opportunity to ask questions. And then the document says, now read the consent form. A consent form is a document in which you say you want to take part in the interview. In this case, we made it easy, we explain it. And this is the consent form. You take part in this, imagine, focus group because you want to. This is the idea of voluntary participation. You can stop when you want, and you do not need to explain why. This is a second concept that always has to be there. People can leave the test and they don't need to explain you why. If you stop, there is no problem at all. Third idea, there are no consequences. People are free to stop at any time. Fourth, data will be confidential, so you will not be saying, Mary said that, okay? And since confidential may be difficult to understand, this means that we will not use your name. The person responsible for this interview is whoever. If you want more information, and then you provide the contact details. So it's always important to give to provide contact details if they want more information. Then you need to add information about the data policy, and this is also a very simple one. First of all, you say who's responsible for your data. And in this case, we explain what personal data is. In the case, it was the name and your email address, but there may be other personal data. We had mentioned when the data will be destroyed, because if you say after 5 years you destroy, then that needs to be destroyed, and it needs to be destroyed safely. You mentioned then that you will follow the European laws, that this information will not be given to other people, to third parties. That's also a very important element. And that you can ask whoever is responsible for a copy, for your data to be deleted, for your data to be modified. And remember, this is something I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. And always you need to provide the data protection officer information. In this case, it's someone from UAB, and we provided an email. And at the end, you need explicit consent. So people signing, selecting yes, or an explicit, it cannot be implicit, saying that they have read the information or someone has explained it to them, that they have been able to ask questions, that they want to take part in the research. And if this is applicable, if you want to record them, you also need explicit consent for that, okay? Date, signature, name, and if someone, if a tutor needs to sign, then you also need to put that information. Maybe it took a bit long to show you this, but I think it's a good example of an easy to understand consent form, which includes all the main elements. Of course, you will be using this consent form when you start your research, but first you have to find your participants, your users, right? So you define them, you categorize them. This is what I explained at the beginning of my talk. But then you need to find them, and it's not always easy. Maybe some advice would be to work with user associations. So for us, at least, it works very well to be in touch with different user associations, and they help us find participants. But you may also have individual contacts, etc., etc. Excuse me. A very important thing is managing expectations. So what do I mean by that? If you want people to be involved in research, they need to know what you are asking, what you will be asking from them. And I'm not referring the questions you will be asking. I'm referring to the availability, how long it will take, for how long they will be involved. So participants need to have the information. And when you communicate with them, it's important to speak the language. Sometimes we use this scientific jargon, in our own fields. When we get out of our fields, we need to talk to understand. And that means maybe not a scientific discourse, and also in their language. So if their language is Spanish, Catalan, English, German, whatever, they need to understand what you are proposing, and they need to sign a document in the language they understand. During the research, as I mentioned before, you need to treat participants with care, avoid ethnocentricity, take care of their dignity and well-being, avoid health risks, and make sure they understand and sign the informed consents. It's not a pure administrative thing. They don't simply sign an informed consent form. They understand and then they sign it. As for the harms or health risk, I mentioned that before, that we may not envisage a problem, but imagine we were doing some tests with VR, virtual reality, and some people experience discomfort. They become a bit dizzy when they use the VR glasses. So this is something we had to say in a previous project. So whenever people came, they needed to be aware that some people may experience discomfort. And of course, while the tests were developing, we made sure that they all sat down, with a specific stool for the research to avoid any of the participants to hurt themselves, basically. And after the research, and this is something that we very often forget, is we need to go back to the participants and inform them of the results. How will you do that? Because it's not just a matter of publishing a paper or a PhD. That's something that a participant will probably not read. How will you explain the results of the research they contributed? So this is something we often forget as researchers, but which I think is quite relevant. In terms of practical aspects, especially if you're working with other people in a collaborative project, I would advise you to always select an ethical advisor. If you are different people, you need to train the different people. You need to all follow the same approach. So this ethical advisor can provide training to all the partners. You need to keep track of to make sure that you've got all the documents, that they are saved where you said you would be saving. And also, if you said that after 5 years, you would be destroying them, remember to do that. Okay, so these are some practicalities that are worth remembering. And now I'll move to the second part of my talk, which will be maybe a bit shorter, which is more related to this knowledge transfer. So I said you will involve participants. You will do research with participants, but once the research is finished, how do you get back to them? And I think that in this case, there are different layers, there are different levels. So you need to get back to participants, but also you can also transfer all this knowledge to society in different forms. You can get involved in standardization. You can transfer these results into policy making and also maybe into training. So when you want to get back to the participants, what I did in a couple of projects, and it worked very well, was to send a summary of the results in very easy language, so no scientific at all, it's not an academic paper, a summary of the results to the participants and to the associations. And they really, really appreciated that you explain why what you did with them, with their members, makes sense and what the results are. And also, it's sometimes good to publish in non-academic publications from the associations. So for instance, we are in close touch with an association from Catalonia that publish a newsletter, and they are very interested in research. So from time to time, they ask us to write a short paragraph on our investigations and in an easy language. And that's good because it disseminates what we are researching beyond academic circles. A thing which is quite recent in our field are what's called lay summaries, easy to understand summaries. JAT, the Journal of Audiovisual Translation, has included this new feature. So any academic article will include a lay summary. And I found this link you've got there on screen, How to Write a Lay Summary by Christopher Tancock. And I found it quite interesting, so I thought I would summarize it for you. Basically, a lay summary is a short paragraph that explains the content of an article, and it's aimed at people who are not experts in the field. So it has to be easy to understand. That's the main concept. Basically, you need to explain why you did that research, so the justification, provide some background and context, but not in an academic way, in a simpler way. You need to structure the article in a logical order, not necessarily the temporal one, and explain the impact, what's going to change because of your paper, especially how this is going to impact on society, on the people, on the lay audiences that are reading that. The sentences should be written in plain English. And I like very much this informal comment saying, pretend you're trying to explain your article to a distant family member who works in another field. Avoid jargon and use first person active voice in the case of English. Don't overuse negative sentences. Try to use positive sentences. If possible, include images. And he also provides a good advice. When you think you're ready with your summary, then ask a friendly non-academic to read it and make sure if they understood. So this is one possibility in terms of knowledge transfer, sending summaries to the people who took part in the research, publishing in non-academic journals, and writing lay summaries in academic journals. But there are other ways to transfer our knowledge to society. One is to be involved in standardization. I'm not going to get into much detail, but a standard is a document that is established by consensus and is approved by a standardization organization. And it's where different experts meet, discuss, and they create a standard, a document that can be based on the research you are doing. It's like a guideline of recommendations, requirements, but from an official source. There can be international, European, national standards, and probably you are familiar with ISO, which is an international body, but maybe you also know ITU from the United Nations, or maybe you're more familiar with European standardization bodies or your national standardization bodies. In any case, you as researchers maybe can be involved in developing standards. In our research group, for instance, we took part in different standards at ISO on audio description, on audio subtitles, on subtitling, and now we co-edited a standard on easy to understand language. Why is it good? Because you get the opportunity to transfer the knowledge from research into a document that hopefully the industry will read. There are other ways to have an impact on society. It's participating in stakeholders meetings, collaborating or writing policy papers. So for instance, in our case at Transmedia Catalonia, we are often involved in meetings from the Department of Culture, the government, dealing with accessibility. So we've been involved in a group dealing with accessibility for the scenic arts, and now we are involved in a group dealing with accessibility for museums. And it's good to be there because there are stakeholders from the industry, from the user associations, but also it's good to have stakeholders from academia. So that's another way to transfer our knowledge. You may be involved in writing policy papers. I advise you to read this paper by Pilar Orero, and which is a policy paper is for non-academic audiences. It tries to identify a problem and suggest a solution in a very short and to the point where you want to change things. Okay, you want to have an impact at policy level. And finally, and I'm referring maybe here to academics, we can also try to have an impact by transferring the knowledge that we acquire through our research into training. So I think what's good when we teach at university level is that what we learn from our investigations is taught to our students. So for instance, we finished this EASIT project I was mentioning before about easy to understand language. And now the content from that project and from some other projects we've been involved has been transferred into, first of all, a course on accessibility management and promotion. This is a 12-week online course now ongoing. And I saw some participants from the course on this in this presentation. And then in March, it was planned for January, but in March, we'll start a course on accessible digital communication. It's also 12 weeks online, and it's not early next year, but it's in March in the end. So I think it's also good to transfer the knowledge back to our students. So that was pretty much what I wanted to tell you. It's 1:15, so I think that's probably the moment for me to stop sharing my screen and hope there's someone there listening to me, because I'm talking to a screen. Now I see Juanpe smiling, so at least Juanpe was listening. And yeah, just to sum up, I think the main point is, if you involve participants, if you involve users, think how you will involve them. Take into account ethical aspects when you involve them. And once you finish your research, I can imagine if you're writing a PhD, you finish your PhD, it's, I finished. Okay, you finished, but how are you going to transfer this knowledge back to the users and back to society? That's a necessary step. So thank you very much. I'm open to questions, comments, or whatever.
COST, European Cooperation in Science and Technology. This video is based upon work from Cost Action Lead Me CA 19142, supported by COST. COST is a funding agency for research and innovation networks. Our actions help connect research initiatives across Europe and enable scientists to grow their ideas by sharing them with their peers. This boosts their research, career and innovation. www.cost.eu. This work is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution CC BY, funded by the Horizon 2020 Framework Programme of the European Union.